Oops, I'm at the beginning. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're now going to have a think about more group and individual support for children with some recognised needs. As we mentioned at the very start of this afternoon session, when it comes to wellbeing, we know that you need to have that universal preventative approach as well as your targeted approach to recognise when some children, young people or staff need some additional support. So hopefully we're going to demonstrate for you today an interactive resource which we as an educational psychology service have developed in conjunction with lots of other professionals. So we've worked very closely with Starting Life Well, with the Learning Support Service, the visual and hearing impairment teams, speech and language therapists, CAMS, to make sure that this is a really evidence-based resource and that hopefully is quite easy for you to navigate and will help you find and select strategies and interventions for children with recognised special educational needs. It covers all 4 areas of need, so cognition and learning, communication and interaction, including social communication difficulties, children on the autistic spectrum, physical and sensory needs, and social, emotional, mental health. And it'll be that section that we're mostly going to look at today, but as they're all structured in the same way, it will hopefully mean that you can work with those other sections just as easily. It lists and links to all the recommended interventions, approaches and strategies that are recognised as being most effective in that area of need. As I mentioned, we've worked with lots of local services. We consulted with schools and settings over summer. We shared it with the Starting Life Well cluster in February last year, so almost a year ago, and when we were just starting to work on it. And then over the summer we had a virtual consultation event, and I know we got some feedback from some early year settings through that process, so huge thanks to those who filled in the online form. We've also looked at other local authorities' examples, and we've tried to pinch the best bits and sort of change the bits that we didn't like. So it is part of Salford's SEND strategy. So the vision for children in Salford who've got additional needs is that every child and young person aged 0 to 25 with SEND will have the fullest opportunity to be happy, healthy and achieve to their full potential. And this version of the document that we'll show you today is specifically for early years, but there are also school age and post 16 versions, which can all be found on the local offer. The link is on the slide there, and I will also post it within the chat alongside the link to go directly to the early years version. And part of this work came from parental feedback that they wanted to know more about what's available for children at SEND support. So for children who haven't got an education, health and care plan, whose needs are being identified early, they wanted to know what schools, what settings could put in place to support their needs and their development. And equally, settings and schools were saying to us that they wanted to know more about the recommended strategies for particular areas of need, so that they themselves felt confident in the interventions that they were using, that they were selecting, and that SENCOs were recommending colleagues use. We know that for very young children, the setting they're in will make such a huge difference to their development. If we think back to Ursula's discussion earlier about that rapid brain development in the first 5 years, so you as early years practitioners make a huge difference to their development and their recovery from the pandemic. You've been crucial to support throughout the whole of this pandemic, and as we mentioned, that's perhaps not been recognised as widely as it should have been. We know that the needs of children and young people across the whole 0 to 5 age range in Salford is increasing in complexity, and that puts additional pressures on settings, especially if there's reduced budgets. So there's some higher expectations without even the added complications of COVID. But we do know that the impact of good SEND support, coordinated by an excellent SENCO and supported by the management, makes a huge difference to children with additional needs, and their school experiences, their early years experiences, and their life chances as they get older. It's a tough job, and we recognise that, but it's such an impactful one. So we wanted to create a document that will make our SENCOs' lives a little bit easier so that they can navigate the complexity of supporting children with additional needs. So from first raising concerns with parents, as I mentioned earlier, you're often the first professionals in early years settings to be doing that, supporting parents to understand the SEN processes and journey through that, to involving parents in gathering their views, to finding the best evidence-based interventions and strategies that have been shown to be the most effective, through working through plan, do, review cycles, and if needed, supporting parents through the EHCP process.
So the SEN Thrive document aims to help guide settings through making a graduated response to supporting the needs of all the children and young people that you have within your settings, whatever those needs might look like. And that might mean that there's things that are put in place at a universal level that are going to be of benefit to all children and young people within your settings. So that could be around things that are in the environment, around things that the staff do, around particular approaches that are offered that are really useful for everyone. And those are the group that are sort of represented at that wider end of the triangle, those universal things that are in place for everyone. But what we might find is that some children will require something that's additional to that. So whether that's perhaps getting advice and support from services such as Starting Life Well or Early Help, or whether they might access particular group work or different bits of provision within their early years settings just to help meet those additional needs. But then we might find that there's a smaller number of children whose needs require something even more additional to that. Those children perhaps who have more severe and complex needs. So the Thrive document is really about thinking about what might be in place at each of those stages and having some indicators of where children might be at different times, because they might move up and down that spectrum at different times of their lives, and just thinking about what could be put in place to support them. And that can be done through implementing assess, plan, do and review cycles. So these are a really key way to support children's development in thinking about what their current strengths are and what the current concerns are as part of the assessment, and planning what sort of things are going to be put in place to be able to support and meet their needs. And again, the SEN Thrive document, which Rachel will show us a bit more of in a moment, is a really good way of thinking about what sorts of things could be put in place at that plan and do stage. And then it is really important to review the impact of that as well, to see what effect those things have had, what's worked and what hasn't, and to decide on what next steps are going to be. So the graduated response and the assess, plan, do and review cycles sort of feed into this SEN Thrive document and the sorts of things that it's helpful for settings to be thinking about whatever stage they're working at. Yeah, and that just talks through the plan, do, review cycle in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Eleanor. So I will just describe the structure and how you can access the SEN Thrive document before I will do a bit of a demo, because I think it's perhaps a bit easier to see it. It makes a bit more sense, I think, when you see it. So the way that we've structured it is so you can have two versions. So there's a PDF version that is online and interactive. I put the link to that in the chat, so you can jump between the different sections by clicking on the page numbers or the headings at the bottom, because it is a big document. But if you wanted to, you're free to download it and to print off bits if you wanted. So it begins with a welcome, which sort of sets the scene and where this piece of work has come from. It then goes on to the best practice walkthrough, which has been designed as a SENCO toolkit, so covering all those areas of best practice in this role. So hopefully covers everything you should need to know as a SENCO or as someone working with a child with additional needs in a setting to work through those SEN processes in one place. So that early identification of need and the plan, do, review cycle Eleanor's just talked about, how you might work with parents, including embedded leaflets, so you can click on them and download them so that you can share information with parents about SEN support, a guide to the Educational Psychology Service, video clips explaining SEN processes and the EHCP process if the child level of need is significant enough to require an education, health and care plan. There is a section around gathering the children's views and how you might incorporate that into your planning, thinking specifically about how you might do that with young children, perhaps non-verbal children, how you might hold review meetings, and then talk you through the EHCP process from that initial gathering of information to making the request, completing the paperwork, and all the timelines linked to that. I'm aware that the Starting Life Well service are planning to do some further work around that to support you with it. So the document should align with that, and also with the early years EFS manual that we talked about earlier. The main Thrive tool is then organised by type of need. So we have used the Thrive framework, which is used by health. In particular, it was developed by CAMS when they were looking at how they offered support. So it helps categorise levels of need. So as you can see in the diagram, in the centre is thriving, and that's like the universal level that everyone can access. And then the idea is that people might move in between the different categories at different times, and that different levels of support are required at each stage. So the first stage is getting advice. It's the green square. And that's around whole setting approaches or whole group approaches that you might put in place. So that, for example, would be things like the mindfulness in the early years that Erica and Carla have just talked about. The next stage up would be getting help, and that's more targeted interventions. So they might be group interventions, for example, an attention skills group for children who are struggling with their attention and listening skills. The purple section is getting more help, and that's the more specialist interventions that might be needed to be delivered on a one-to-one or a two-to-one basis, or might be linked to a child's very specific needs. For example, particular interventions or adaptations around a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. The Thrive model also includes the getting risk support section, and we've included a corresponding section to support settings to manage risk in relation to SEND. So that's kind of a bit of it's not a standalone document, it signposts very much to other settings and services that you might involve, but that's around supporting children who maybe display some distressed or some challenging behaviours, such as self-injurious behaviours, for example, children who have got particular sensory needs and are seeking those out in a particular way, such as head banging, or children who perhaps rely on that type of behaviour because they've got some very limited communication skills, and the planned response that you might put in place to manage that safely. Again, linked to children who display distressed behaviours, who maybe externalise some of that through throwing, kicking, biting, those types of behaviours, how again you might put a planned response in place to support those children. And things that you might put in place to support staff as well. So it thinks about structures such as supported conversations. So again, thinking back to staff wellbeing and how as a team you are supporting each other, because there's possibly nothing more stressful and requires more of your own self-regulation than trying to manage a child's challenging or distressed behaviours. And linked to each of the sections, there is a glossary. And this is included at the end of the main Thrive tool, and that helps sort of list all of the interventions that we recommend, gives you a bit of a description, and it gives you the costings as well, because we wanted to make it easy for you to think about which interventions you could engage with at each stage. So we didn't want you to start looking into maybe a very expensive intervention without perhaps having the budget for at that time. So it can help you pick and maybe target the types of interventions that are right for you at that time. We've tried to include as many as possible that are low cost, and many are free. And you can just find out more by clicking a link to a website. So this is how the main Thrive tool is structured. As mentioned, it's in a table. So from getting advice, getting help to getting more help. The strategies are very much suggestions and recommended approaches. It's not to be seen as a tick list or something that you've got to work through. So you've got to work through all of the getting advice before you can move to getting help. It's not meant to be used in that way at all. It's much more flexible and just hopefully has everything in one place for you to go through and think about the children in your setting, the particular child that you're working with and what might work for them. And it might be that some children have enough from just strategies at the getting advice stage. Some might need the getting advice alongside getting help, and some might need all three. And the hyperlinks have been included to make it as easy as possible for you to quickly find further information, find linked resources, examples or templates. So I will give you a bit of a demo now, hopefully, because I think that's the easiest way for you to see how it looks and how you might use it. So I will just come out of sharing my screen. Okay, and then I will hopefully be able to bring up the PDF version that you can get to by clicking the link in the local offer. Just find it. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that now. Okay, so this is what it'll look like when you load it, and then you can, if you want, you can just save it and download it. I have using the save button. I have found that some of the embedded documents don't work so well within the online version. So if there are particular things that you want to click on and print and download, then it might help to save a copy to your computer, and then you can click on them. I don't know if it's the way it's been uploaded to the local offer, but it kind of jumps around a bit. So it's better to use a saved version. So if I just scroll down, you can see the contents page. So it begins with the acknowledgements. So you can see everyone who contributed to the development of this document, the welcome that talks about how it's to be used and its purpose. And then onto that best practice walkthrough that I mentioned, which helps you think about whole setting approaches, how you might use your SEN data, so perhaps using your tracking data to think about if there are particular pockets of need within your setting where you need some additional support at maybe a wider group or whole setting level, how you might work with parents. And as you can see, a little hand comes up when I hover over it, so it allows you to jump to the relevant section. So clicked on collaboration with parents. It talks about how you might involve parents. Again, some embedded documents that you can link to and download to share with parents. If I go back to the contents, you can just quickly tab between the sections at the bottom because it is a huge document, so it helps you hopefully navigate it a bit easier. Talks through the graduated response. That can be helpful maybe if you've got parents who are keen to get their child an education, health and care plan. You can talk them through that process, that graduated response process, the plan, do, review cycle, how you might gather and respond to children's views, and then all the information around the EHCP process. And again, we've linked lots of resources and documents for you to use with parents to help them understand what can be a very complex process. Okay, so if I jump now to the Thrive tool, you can see that it begins with social, emotional, mental health. We have provided the EYFS links in each area. And here you can see that it starts with sort of general approaches to supporting social emotional development. And if you just hover on the links, I will open this in a new tab so it doesn't take me away from the document. But a bit of a shameless plug. Here you'll see it takes you to the Emotionally Friendly Settings website, which we talked about earlier. It also takes you to different interventions. So if I click on the yoga one, it will bring up information about Cosmic Yoga, Cosmic Kids, which is really lovely. I imagine lots of you have come across it. It's free to access on YouTube. I have done lots of Cosmic Yoga Kids with my own children, with Jamie, whilst we've been in lockdown. It's for different ages, so she's got some video clips that are for very young children now, and it's a lovely way to introduce some yoga and some mindfulness into your settings. There are information about how you might gather the views of children who are non-verbal, who've got communication difficulties, or early years children. So that's the mosaic approach. So that links you to a resource, which will give you a bit of an overview and some guidance as to how you might implement that in your setting. Then if I scroll further down, there's links to resources or templates, for example, one-page profiles that you can download and use, and to strategies that we really recommend, such as emotion coaching. So that takes you to the emotion coaching page. We have also got information about emotion coaching within the appendix to the early years version, and that talks you through how you might use emotion coaching to respond to children in emotional moments. Okay, so if I scroll further down, you'll be able to see what else is covered in the SEMH section. So making relationships and peer interactions. It thinks about how you might support children, again, at a group level, but also through some recommended group interventions, how you might assess their interactions with adults, identify some strengths, some areas of need so that you can put some targeted intervention in place, and approaches such as intensive interaction, which are really good for children who are struggling with joint attention or interacting with others. And as you can see, it recommends where you might want to link to other sections, such as the communication and interaction section. The other area covered in this part of the Thrive tool are managing feelings. So how you might support children with their emotional regulation, with their self-regulation, through co-regulation, how you might think about nurturing your environment, different tools again that you might use. Mindfulness is in there. And then if I tab down to the bottom, this is what the glossary looks like. So it lists all of the interventions that we recommend, gives you a brief description, and also the cost, so you can factor in relation to your budget. And then if I tab to the bottom, this takes you to the Getting Risk Support section, which, as I mentioned, this section covers self-injurious behaviour, what you might want to do, how you might signpost, how you might put a planned response in place alongside other professionals, how you might manage children's distress behaviours, thinking about that arousal curve and how when children are in sort of a very heightened emotional state, you might respond differently to when they're much calmer, and the importance of having a planned response so that staff are all consistent in the way in which they are working with children. So there's lots of information in there. And again, the appendices that I mentioned. So a bit of information about ABC charts, the STAR approach, which is similar to ABC, but it has a bit more analysis around a child's behaviour and what it could mean in relation to their wider development. And then templates for supportive conversations, which is that way of supporting each other. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea around an emotion coaching, a bit of an idea about how you can use the tool and where you can find it. I will go back into my presentation. There is, on the local offer, you will find the early years version alongside the school age and the post-16 version if you wanted to see all of them. Anybody got any questions? Feel free to add to the chat if you do, and we will respond to them after the session, or if you're not feeling brave to say it out loud to the big group. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Oops, that's gone small. Thank you very much for coming along. We really hope that you have enjoyed the sessions this afternoon. We will put a link to an evaluation form in the chat. So before you leave, please do complete that, because it'd be really useful for our future learning to get a sense of what you've enjoyed, what you'd like more of. And if you do have any questions about any of the content, myself and Eleanor can stay around if you wanted to ask any questions, but hopefully you've got a good overview of early years EFS, the Send Thrive document, and some ideas to take away to support staff wellbeing.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.